Now, before we start talking about cloud virtualization in practice, we have to talk about it in theory. There are a lot of different ways by which we can classify cloud services and cloud environments. Three of the main categories, and the thing to know, the way I say that is three of the main categories, not the three categories. There are other categories. Um, there is security as a service. There's disaster recovery as a service. The three big ones are infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. Uh, in the infrastructure as a service model, the service provider, the cloud service provider, whether public or private, provides just the bare basics, the physical hardware, and the client does practically everything. Configure the virtual machines, configure some of the networking potentially, um, plus all of the working infrastructure that goes on top of it. So the service provider is responsible for the physical hardware, the keeping the power on, keeping the networks up between the hosts that they're selling access to, and the client does everything else. Platform as a service is kind of halvesies. Um, the the service provider provides the hardware, provides the OS, and the client is using that platform either to run or to develop applications. In software as a service, the vendor is providing the software itself. Say a prime example of this would be Google Apps. If you're just using an application in the cloud, that's software as a service. And so the client is responsible for providing a user list, maintaining the user list, permissions, making sure they're buying enough access, et cetera, et cetera. But what they do with it is more or less their problem, and everything underneath is the provider's problem. Now, this virtualization technology is the backbone of cloud services. The ability to provision new VMs at will, to move data between one place and another. The thing about the cloud, as you may have heard me say before, if you've had me in class, the cloud is somebody else's hard drive. The cloud is somebody else's computer. And there's literally no guarantee that if you're looking at a piece of cloud storage, a directory in cloud storage, that those two files are on the same physical machine or the same virtual machine. They're presenting it to you, and you really have no idea what's going on under the hood. And if you want to not have any idea what's going on under the hood, software as a service is just right for you. Now, like I said, there are multiple kinds of clouds. I sort of referenced that. The three big options are public, private, and hybrid. As the name suggests, a public cloud is provided to anyone for free or for a fee. Private clouds are built by a company that is providing the service, and it's basically all internal. There are also hybrid clouds, which have a mixture of public and private. So you might have a basically private cloud, but with some hybrid or public access, just in case things go sideways. Say, for example, your server load spikes, and you've got a bunch of virtualized web servers or app servers or whatnot. But you also have an arrangement with, say, VMware vCloud or Amazon Web Services, so that if you need half a dozen more web servers or half a dozen more app servers, you can just provision those at will, spin them up, use them as long as you need them, drop them, say, for those bursts of heavy activity. Say if your your interesting new product has come up on the front page of some important aggregation site, mentioned at the register or popped up on an important and popular subreddit, or in the old days before Slashdot became irrelevant, if it showed up on Slashdot. So let's look at these cloud environments. There's also a pretty picture. Let's listen. So we've got the cloud. What we used to say call the cloud was we used to use that word as sort of a vague metaphor for a large network of unknown topology. We know packets go into the cloud. We know the packets come out of the cloud. We don't know what happens to the packets in the cloud. Because really and truly, just like a physical cloud, where you really can't have any idea where what the internal structure of that cloud is, where the really dense pockets of gas and vapor are, and where the relative voids are, and how they're moving relative to each other. You really don't know what's going on in the cloud, except, hey, there's stuff in the cloud. Um, so these days, the cloud also means virtualized computing in that same um, network that you don't really, whose internals you really don't understand. So we've got managed services, you've got software, you've got infrastructure, you've got storage. And sometimes maybe you may just be using the cloud for storage, say Dropbox, or you might have managed services or software like Google Apps, or even infrastructure. And all of these things are you're tying into the cloud for your user with your user clients. Now, I mentioned the infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. This is basically another way of looking at that. Of course, with infrastructure as a service, what they're selling is the system, and you provide the developers and the end users. Um, with platform as a service, they give you the system, you provide the developers, you build the software you want. With software as a service, you're mostly targeted toward end users, because they have data they want to manipulate, or files they want to share, um, or collaboration that they want to engage in over the cloud. Now, what this used to, and let's look at this just a slightly different way as well. So we've got um, another way of looking at this is whether the cloud is on premises or internal. An on-premises cloud, an internal cloud, is like if you've built a little cloud for yourself on your own campus, or for your own organization, and you're really not exposing that to anyone, that is an internal or a private cloud. If you've got an off-premises or third-party cloud that everyone can get to, that's public, in the cloud, in the internet. Um, and then, of course, a hybrid would be a private or internal cloud which is tied in with a public segment of the cloud, as needed. So you can think of the building as your private cloud, because it's tightly compartmentalized. Your cloud as the public cloud, because anyone can get to it, and that green box as your hybrid here, because it has a little bit of both. Now, a community cloud might be the same sort of thing, but built not for a company, but for or an organization, but for, say, I don't know, a community, a city, a town, a county, etc., with maybe some government agency providing some degree of cloud service, for the purposes of providing other services to the constituents of that county. Let me see. And next we'll talk about the sort of virtualization features we should look for. I'll be right back.